Hey there, FPV fans. Today we're going to look at some modifications that I made to the Hubsan Spyhawk system, the aircraft and the transmitter receiver. These are some things that I felt like it needed. It was fun to experiment with, and at the same time it was a little bit challenging. I don't recommend this to most people, but the results have actually been phenomenal. So the first thing I want to show you is, you can see I've got a different antenna system on the transmitter receiver system here, and of course what I had to do was get inside the case, and I actually had to remove the current antenna system and add the SMA connectors here. I did on both sides. I did it on the 5.8 and the 2.4, both, which allows me the option of whatever antenna I want to use, and this has enhanced it greatly, especially the video receive section. These neat new antennas from Immersion, these Spironet antennas, are fantastic. This actually has worked out beautifully on this system. One of the major drawbacks to the Hubsan was that it had a little antenna in this area here above this gimbal that was very directional, and you actually had to have your transmitter constantly pointed at the aircraft, or you weren't able to see your video signal. So obviously now with the Spironet antenna, you don't have to be pointed at the aircraft any longer, and as well on the 2.4 side, I can use whatever antenna I want to use on here. If I want to use a higher gain antenna, I can do that, or if I want to use one of the circular polarized antennas, I can do that if I'd like. So that has worked out really well. And now I want to show you what I've done on the aircraft. On the aircraft, this was a little bit tricky, but interesting at the same time. The antenna for the 5.8 system used to come out of the bottom of the aircraft, where that little hole is right there, and I put the plywood fin on to protect it. Well, you know, I thought about that, and I thought, gosh, that's just, I mean, it's running a long, tiny piece of coax all the way to the front, because the transmitter for the 5.8 is all the way up here in the nose. So what I did, I took another Spironet antenna and actually cut the connector off, leaving me a certain amount of coax, and actually soldered it right. You probably won't be able to see. You can see the solder drop on that side. You can't see the ground, but I've actually soldered it to the board at the antenna connector side. I've actually soldered it on. There's no connector, so it's a good direct connection to the Spironet antenna on the bottom, just behind the camera. And I've actually put quite a bit of super glue around it to reinforce it. It's a very strong housing. I'm not going to have any problems with this unless I landed it on concrete or pavement, which I don't plan on doing. But you know, even if I did, it's just going to scratch it. It's not going to hurt it. It's just going to scratch it. It won't be a big deal. The second thing I did was, the antenna for the 2.4 gigahertz receiver was right in the area there, where you can see a lot of wires. It was sticking straight up, and there was no ground plane, what we call a ground plane radial. Well, I changed it. I unsoldered it, soldered it to the bottom of the receiver board, and now it sticks straight out the bottom. You can see this black area. You can just see a little bump right here. That little bump is actually the end of the 2.4 gigahertz receiving antenna, and I've reinforced it with some black super glue, as well as I'm leaving my fin on there to protect it. This cutout was made just so I could get the antenna out. I'll be gluing that section back in. as well as I'll be gluing the nose section back on. But I've also added, I don't think you'll be able to see them, but I've also added two copper wire ground planes that are now sticking up. What this is doing is it's making the radiation pattern more downward. I mean, obviously the aircraft is above you, so this is helping the 2.4 gigahertz reception a little bit. You probably couldn't do better unless you had a gain antenna on this thing. But the most important thing was these neat Spironet antennas, which are circular polarized. This has added a tremendous amount of range. It's interesting how we've gotten quite a bit more range. I've not measured it in feet, but it's substantially more. The video quality, you don't have the cutouts where it immediately goes to the blue screen. You don't have that any longer unless you get way out. I'm still experimenting with it, but the addition of the 5.8 Spironet antennas is absolutely fantastic on a very inexpensive aircraft that typically most FPVers will ignore, and now I've actually created a pretty decent little tiny FPV system, and it's working out quite well. Again, I'll probably get some flight videos coming up here pretty soon to show you the range, but it's been an impressive and interesting little modification to this neat little system.